Welcome to Decarbonize and the third video in my series of greenhouse gases other than carbon dioxide. This one is on methane, the second most important greenhouse gas. And there are a few things you can do to reduce the amount of methane in the atmosphere, so watch to the end if you want to be part of the solution. First, what is methane and why do we care about it? It's a common gas made up of carbon and hydrogen and is the active ingredient in natural gas that many use to heat their homes and cook their food. Almost all we use is a fossil fuel, but it is also produced naturally when organic matter is metabolized by microbes in an anaerobic or oxygen-free environment. When methane is burned, the output is CO2 and water. So we're still creating a greenhouse gas by using it, but a much less powerful one. About 40% of the methane in the atmosphere is from natural sources like wetlands. Looking at the table here, we see that 36% of the U.S.'s anthropogenic methane comes from agriculture, mainly enteric fermentation, which is just a technical way of saying cow burps. A similar amount comes from fossil fuels, primarily natural gas and petroleum production, and 17% comes from landfills. This map, using data from the Copernicus Sentinel 5P satellite, shows the largest point sources across the globe. Oil and gas in the US and Eastern Europe, landfills in India, coal in China and Australia. This data will be critical in creating policies and plugging leaks, starting with the worst offenders. Unlike carbon dioxide, which lingers in the atmosphere for over a century, methane is cleared out after about 12 years. So if we stop putting it there, the levels will drop quickly. That, combined with the fact that methane is responsible for about 30% of the changing climate, it makes sense to focus here. In my greenwashing episode, I talked a lot about methane and its history. If you're interested in learning more, I have a link down below for that video. Let's look at these three sectors, agriculture, fossil fuels, and landfills, and see what can be done to reduce these emissions. Let's look at agricultural emissions first, which are dominated by cows. We've all heard that beef is much worse for the environment than other sources of meat, and enteric fermentation is why. Just moving from beef to lamb reduces the emissions by 60%. Poultry has about 10% of the emissions of cattle, and vegetarian diet is about half of chickens. There are lots of ideas to reduce the methane from raising beef. Free range versus lot fed, adding seaweed to the feed, breeding cattle that produce less methane, and the list goes on. Some of these might work out, but at this point, there's no clear way to reduce your emissions from eating beef other than eating less of it. After cow burps, the second biggest issue is manure management. The solution there is anaerobic digesters. If you've been paying attention, you'll be thinking, didn't I just say that? But it is also produced naturally when organic matter is metabolized by microbes in an anaerobic or oxygen-free environment. And yes, it will. But we capture and use this methane as a fuel rather than letting it escape into the atmosphere. By processing manure through a digester, you get methane as a fuel and high-quality fertilizer for the fields growing the feed. That's classic circular economy. The situation for fossil fuels is interesting. On the one hand, the fossil fuel industry touts natural gas as a miraculous clean fuel that will be the bridge between dirty old coal and clean renewables. On the other hand, methane, which is what natural gas is responsible for 30% of the changing climate, and the fossil fuel industry is responsible for about a third of that methane. It looks like the fossil fuel industry may be fibbing a bit.
How can he close me up? On what ground?
I'm shocked to find that gambling is going on in here.
You're winning, sir.
Oh, thank you very much.
As an individual, there's not much you can do. You can switch your home heating from methane to an electric heat pump. That's definitely helpful. But much of the emission comes from old wells that aren't even active or abandoned coal mines. The pipelines moving methane around the country leak, but it's probably not a good idea to go around with a methane detector and duct tape trying to solve that problem.
All right, first thing you want to do is you want to seal up all the openings here. I would suggest don't go cheap on this. It's your life that's at stake, so use a handyman secret weapon, duct tape.
One thing that makes it easier is that if the gas producers can capture the methane or prevent it from escaping, they can sell it, which will fund the effort to capture it. So the industry has an incentive to improve the situation. For example, a methane plume in Argentina was detected by the European Space Agency's Sentinel-5P satellite. The UN International Methane Emissions Observatory reached out to their point of contact in Argentina, who used the provided data to identify the source of the plume. The responsible company used the information to track down a piece of broken equipment and repair it, saving them money and eliminating a significant source of emissions. But of the 127 plumes detected in 2023, this is the only one where it's been verified that the problem was fixed. It's not clear what happened in the other cases, but it might just be that the company fixed the problem but didn't want to share the details, or the data was insufficient to identify the source. MethaneSAT is the latest in a series of satellites that can detect methane emissions from space. It was recently launched into orbit and will soon start releasing data. It was built specifically to look for methane in the regions of oil and gas production with enough resolution to provide actionable information to the operators. By the end of this year, they should have data that will identify many sources of methane and enable the oil and gas industry to plug leaks, cap wells, or make other low-cost changes that could greatly reduce the methane emissions from this sector. Now on to landfills, the sector where you can most easily make a contribution. Any organic matter that is broken down by microbes in an anaerobic environment, like kitchen scraps placed in a landfill, will generate methane. In an old-fashioned landfill, the methane would just escape into the atmosphere, where it acted as a greenhouse gas. Large landfills in the developed world capture that methane, and it can be used to heat homes or generate electricity. But in the developing world, things aren't so great. As we saw in the Sentinel-5P map, India is covered with methane plumes, many of which are related to landfills. So how can you prevent methane emissions from landfills? By keeping organic matter, mainly kitchen scraps and yard waste, out of the landfill. If your city has green waste collection, then all you need to do is put your organic waste in the correct bin. But even if you don't have curbside green waste collection, it's not hard to compost this waste at home. And as a reward, you get great soil for your garden. I'm a fan of vermiculture, or worm composting. In 20 years of composting, I never had trouble with bugs or rodents or smells. As long as the microbes or worms have plenty of air, they won't make methane, and they will make something good for your garden. If you don't have space for traditional composting, you might consider a tabletop electric composter like Lomi or Aerthol. I've never used one of these, so I don't have much advice, but they look interesting. Since they aren't actually composting the waste, it's critical that you don't throw what they produce in the garbage, since it will still be turned into methane by the microbes in the landfill. If a city is unable to keep organic matter out of the landfill, then they must upgrade their facilities to capture the methane and use it to generate electricity or heat. There are some who see the great opportunities to make easy progress in reducing methane as an excuse to go slowly on carbon dioxide. And that might have been a good approach in 1990. But we've delayed action for so long we can't afford to go fast on methane and slow on carbon dioxide. The Methane First approach does not fundamentally change how we power our economy. We continue to heat our homes with fossil gas and drive cars powered by oil. The Methane First approach postpones the transition to a carbon-free society, and we can't delay that transition by even one more day. 150 countries have signed on to the Global Methane Pledge to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030. The new satellites coming online can provide fast and precise data, making this goal achievable by focusing on the largest emitters in the oil and gas industry and landfills. In the 2030s, we'll have to work harder to maintain the momentum. So let's keep organic waste out of landfills, plug leaking oil wells, and reduce our beef consumption. All things we can do today, but we also need to decarbonize our grid, electrify transportation, and figure out how we power our planes and ships. Please like and subscribe if you've learned something. If you want to support this channel financially, you can buy me a coffee. The link is below and right next to me. And you can watch another one of my videos here. And please share this video with anyone you know who doesn't sort their organic waste properly.